A single dad spends one unforgettable night with a billionaire CEO who vanishes by sunrise. When he searches for her, he uncovers a secret powerful enough to destroy them both.
Ethan Ward never planned on being out this late, but over time had become a quiet routine in his life as a single father. At 32, he was steady, soft-spoken, and always tired in a way only single parents understood. His world revolved around work at the Grand Meridian Hotel, and his daughter Lily, whose school lunches and bedtime stories mattered more than anything. That night, the hotel lobby buzzed with tension as a manager hurried toward him, breathless. "VIP pickup, very important. Be respectful, don't ask questions," he muttered. Ethan simply nodded, grabbed his car keys, and walked outside, assuming he'd be driving another diplomat or some influencer running late to a party. But when the security team escorted a woman toward his car, he froze. She was stunning, but not in the polished way rich people usually looked. Her hair was messy, her heels dangling from her fingers, her eyes red from tears and alcohol. This was Aurora Kane, though Ethan didn't know that yet, the youngest billionaire CEO in the city. Right now, she didn't look powerful, she looked lost. She slid into the back seat without a word, her voice shaking as she told him to just drive somewhere, anywhere but there. Ethan didn't pry. It wasn't his place. He started the engine, pulled out into the rain-slick streets, and let the silence sit between them. But the quiet didn't last long. Within minutes, Aurora leaned forward, her breath warm with wine, whispering, "Have you ever had your whole world turn against you in one night?" Ethan met her gaze in the rearview mirror and answered honestly, "I've had nights that changed everything. But you survive. You always survive." Something about his calm voice made her exhale a shaky laugh. She told him she'd been betrayed by people who had smiled in her face just hours earlier. Her board, her friends, even family. They'd plotted to take her company, planning a vote to replace her while she was still in the building. She had stormed out, broken and furious, and into the bar where she drank too much for someone with her level of responsibility. Ethan listened, not as a driver, but as a human, because pain didn't care about bank accounts. The storm outside grew intense, thunder shaking the sky as the city flooded quickly. Roads were closing, bridges blocked. The hotel dispatcher radioed Ethan, advising him to take refuge at the company lodge on the hillside, an emergency shelter for VIPs during severe weather. Aurora didn't argue. She just leaned her forehead against the window, eyes glistening with heartbreak. By the time they reached the lodge, the rain was pounding so loudly it drowned out their footsteps. Inside, the fireplace glowed, casting soft light across the room. Aurora sank onto the couch, hugging her knees, walls finally collapsing after a battle she had fought alone. Ethan brought her a blanket, hesitating as she looked up at him with vulnerable, tired eyes. "Stay. Just don't leave me alone tonight." And so, in the flicker of warm firelight, with the storm raging outside, a night began that neither of them expected, one that would change both of their lives forever.
Ethan woke with a slow, heavy breath, the faint crackle of last night's fire still humming in the background. For a moment he lay still, unsure where he was, his mind foggy from exhaustion and the emotional storm he'd walked into the night before. Then it hit him, the lodge, the storm, Aurora's trembling voice, the way she'd fallen asleep leaning against his shoulder, as if she hadn't trusted anyone in years. He sat up quickly, heart thumping, expecting to find her curled up on the couch or wrapped in the blanket he'd tucked around her. But the lodge was silent, empty. The blanket was folded, the fireplace dimmed to dying embers. Her shoes were gone, her bag missing, even her half-finished glass of water taken, as if she'd scrubbed away any hint she had ever been there. Ethan stepped outside into the crisp morning air, dew glistening on the grass, and the storm clouds drifting apart, leaving behind a peace that didn't match the knot forming in his chest. Aurora Kane, though he still didn't know that name, had vanished without a trace. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had an early meeting. Maybe she'd called another car while he slept. Maybe she regretted the vulnerability she had shown and wanted distance. He didn't judge her. He just wished she'd said goodbye. As he drove back to the hotel, the morning sun rising behind him, he kept replaying her words. the betrayal, the fear, the way she had clutched his sleeve like she was drowning. Something about her disappearance felt wrong. Not dramatic, not rude, wrong. When he clocked in at the hotel, his supervisor eyed him strangely and gestured toward the security office. "They need to check the VIP logs from last night," the supervisor said. Inside, the security team replayed footage of Ethan escorting Aurora to the car. One guard stiffened. "That's Aurora Kane," he murmured. Ethan blinked, confused. "Who?" The guard stared at him like he'd spoken another language. "Aurora Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, one of the richest women in the country. She went missing this morning. Her assistant filed a concern because she never came home." A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. Missing. Hours after leaving the lodge. No statements, no sightings, no calls. The media erupted within minutes. Headlines flashed across the lobby screens. "Aurora Kane disappears after corporate showdown." Hospitality staff whispered. Guests gathered around TVs, and Ethan's stomach twisted as he watched a grainy image of Aurora stepping into his car replay on every channel. Not only was she missing, he was the last person seen with her. He didn't panic, but he felt crushing worry. What if someone from her board had found her? What if she'd gone somewhere unsafe? What if she'd left him not because she wanted to, but because she had to? Ethan tried to focus on work, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. The night they shared wasn't a mistake, and it certainly wasn't forgettable. It felt like something unfinished, like a conversation paused halfway through a confession. And now she had vanished, slipping out of his life with no explanation and leaving behind a silence far louder than any goodbye could have been.
Days turned into a slow, uneasy blur as Ethan tried to keep his life steady for Lily while his mind kept drifting back to Aurora's disappearance. He didn't want to obsess, but every news update made his heart sink a little more. Reporters camped outside Kane Industries. Rumors flew across social media. Kidnapping, corporate sabotage, voluntary retreat, even scandal. Ethan ignored the noise and focused on what he knew. Aurora had been scared, betrayed, and running from something far bigger than one stormy night. Yet he tried to continue his routine. Lily needed breakfast, school runs, and someone who wasn't constantly glued to the television. On a quiet Thursday evening, after dropping Lily at her friend's house, Ethan stopped by the hotel's garage to clean his car. He opened the back door and started shaking out the floor mats when something metallic glinted under the seat. He reached down and pulled out a slim, elegant silver bracelet, too expensive to belong to any ordinary guest. At first he assumed Aurora had simply dropped it, but when he turned it over, his breath caught. Engraved on the inside was a series of numbers and tiny initials, AK 47392. Not decorative, not random, something coded. Curiosity scratched at him, refusing to loosen its grip. He went home, placed the bracelet under his desk lamp, and jotted the numbers onto a notepad. Lily, who had returned from her playdate, wandered in and asked, "Is that a puzzle?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe." She leaned closer, squinting. "Looks like a password, or like those secret codes in spy movies." Her innocent comment shook something loose in Ethan's mind. Aurora hadn't been running from heartbreak alone. She'd mentioned a betrayal. She'd mentioned people wanting her out. She'd mentioned danger. What if this bracelet wasn't an accessory at all? He opened his laptop and searched the number sequence. At first, nothing appeared, until he paired the initials with the digits. Suddenly, articles surfaced about private investigation codes used within Kane Industries, specifically for high-level security cases. His pulse quickened. The bracelet wasn't just hers. It was tied to a confidential inquiry Aurora had opened months earlier, an inquiry into misconduct by several members of her board. Ethan felt the air shift around him. This wasn't a romantic mystery or a dramatic disappearance driven by heartbreak. This was a woman being hunted by people with power and resources. Someone had discovered her investigation. Someone had silenced her. He paced the room, trying to stay calm, but his thoughts kept circling back to the same truth. Aurora had been terrified that night, not of losing her company, of losing her life. And now he was holding a clue she must have dropped in her panic. Should he take it to the police? The media? Her company? He didn't trust any of them, not after hearing what she'd been through. He felt an unfamiliar spark of responsibility rise in him, stronger than fear. Aurora didn't vanish because she wanted to disappear from him. She vanished because she had been fighting alone. And now, by accident or fate, she had left a trail for him to follow. Ethan closed his fist around the bracelet and made a silent promise in the dim glow of his desk lamp. He wasn't going to let her become another headline. He would find her.
Ethan didn't know where to begin, but he couldn't stay still anymore. The bracelet pulsed in his pocket like a reminder that Aurora had trusted him in ways she hadn't meant to. After dropping Lily at school the next morning, he started visiting the few places Aurora had mentioned during their short, fragile conversations in the lodge. Kane Tower was the first, a massive glass building guarded by people who looked like they didn't blink unless paid to. Ethan walked inside, pretending he had a delivery, and asked for Aurora's assistant, Marin. The receptionist hesitated, then lowered her voice and told him Marin had been working nonstop since Aurora vanished. Ethan waited more than an hour before a slim woman with tired eyes approached him cautiously. "You were the driver," she whispered, pulling him into a quiet corner. She didn't sound accusing, she sounded scared. Ethan nodded and showed her the bracelet. For a moment, Marin just stared at it, her hand trembling. "She never should have carried this outside the building," she said. "That code belongs to a private case she opened against 2 board members. They were stealing information, moving funds, preparing to force her out. She told me she needed proof before confronting them." Marin's eyes softened, and then she disappeared, after telling me she didn't trust anyone inside the company. Ethan felt a knot twist in his chest. "What about you?" Marin gave a bitter smile. "I'm loyal, but loyalty doesn't matter when the people trying to remove her own half the city." Marin warned him to be careful, but Ethan needed answers. His next stop was the underground garage where Aurora's car had last pinged. A security guard let him in after seeing the bracelet, whispering, "I heard they followed her." The idea chilled Ethan more than the dim concrete air around him. He wandered through the rows of silent vehicles, imagining Aurora running through here, breathless, terrified, clutching her bag like a shield. Every detail painted a frightening picture. Aurora hadn't vanished voluntarily, she had been cornered. He followed lead after lead, parking receipts, cafe sightings, a security camera that had caught her rushing into a private lounge. But the deeper he looked, the darker the picture became. Someone had been tracking her for days. Someone who wanted her silenced before she exposed them. Ethan found himself staring at skyscrapers, feeling impossibly small in a world where power didn't play fair. But then he thought of Aurora's trembling hands the night they met, of Lily asking why he looked so sad these days, and something inside him hardened. He wasn't a detective, he wasn't rich, but he was steady, stubborn, and unwilling to let a woman like Aurora disappear without anyone fighting for her. Ethan returned to the lodge that evening, hoping to spot something he'd missed. As he walked through the quiet halls, a faint memory tugged at him, the sound of a phone vibrating from Aurora's bag the night of the storm. He checked the drawer where she'd set it down. Empty. But the faint imprint in the dust told him someone else had been there after she left, someone searching for something she carried. He stepped back, heart racing, realizing he wasn't the only one looking for Aurora, and unlike him, the others didn't want Aurora found alive. Ethan drove for hours without stopping, guided only by scraps of information Marin had given him, and the instinct that Aurora was running somewhere she believed no one would think to search. The clue that led him forward was a quiet detail Marin had mentioned offhandedly.
Aurora's mother once owned a remote villa on the cliffs outside the city, a property hidden under a private trust and known only to a handful of people. Ethan knew a place like that was where someone exhausted and hunted might retreat to, especially someone who had run out of safe ground. The road grew narrow as he approached the coastline, the air foggy and cool, crashing waves echoing below. He parked under a cluster of wind-battered trees and made his way up a stone path covered in fallen leaves. There, tucked into the cliff like a forgotten memory, stood a silent villa with shuttered windows and a locked iron gate. Ethan's heart pounded as he called her name softly. No response. He tried the gate. It opened with a slow creak, and he stepped inside. The villa's front door was slightly ajar, and a warm flicker of light leaked through the gap. Ethan swallowed his nerves, pushed it open, and stepped into a quiet room glowing from a single lamp. Aurora Kane stood in the center, barefoot, pale, and staring at him as if she'd seen a ghost. Her breath caught first. "Ethan?" She cried his name, disbelief softening the sharpness she usually carried. She looked thinner, more fragile, and yet somehow fiercer than the night he had last seen her. Ethan held up the bracelet, and her eyes filled instantly. Not with fear this time, but relief. She rushed toward him, then stopped halfway, unsure if she had the right to close the distance. Ethan stepped forward instead. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said quietly. Aurora's lips trembled as she whispered, "You shouldn't have. It's dangerous." She explained everything in a flood, how the board members confronted her, how someone hacked her security files, how she barely escaped with Marin's help, and how she fled here because she didn't want Ethan or Lily dragged into the mess that could cost her life. "They threatened my family, my people, and you," she murmured, voice shaking. "I ran because I couldn't let them touch anyone I cared about." Ethan reached for her hand and squeezed gently. "You think running keeps people safe? It only makes you fight alone." Aurora broke then, the weight of isolation cracking open as she pressed her forehead against his chest, letting out the breath she'd been holding for weeks. She apologized for leaving him without a word, admitted she had thought about him every day since they met, and confessed she never believed someone like him would come after someone like her. "Why did you?" she whispered. Ethan's answer was simple. "Because you mattered." She closed her eyes as tears slipped down, the first she had allowed herself since the night they met. For the first time, Aurora wasn't the billionaire fighting to keep control of an empire. She was a woman exhausted from being betrayed, hunted, and alone. And Ethan wasn't just the driver who'd been at the wrong place at the right time. He was the one person who crossed an entire city, risked his peace, and stepped into her shadows just to bring her back into the light. The days that followed their reunion moved in a blur of strategy, danger, and determination as Ethan helped Aurora gather the final proof she needed to expose the board members behind the conspiracy. They worked from the quiet villa, using Marin as their only safe contact, piecing together hidden files, financial trails, encrypted recordings, and emails Aurora had collected before her disappearance. Aurora was relentless, but Ethan could see the fatigue shadowing her eyes. Every now and then he would step in, remind her to rest, hand her a cup of tea, or insist she take a break long enough to breathe. She wasn't used to someone caring for her without wanting something in return. Each time he did, she looked at him with a mix of gratitude and disbelief, as if she were still learning how to accept gentleness. When the evidence was finally strong enough, Aurora scheduled a meeting with her legal team and the authorities. She wanted to return on her terms, not as a victim dragged back into the public eye, but as the woman who refused to be erased from her own empire. Ethan drove her to Kane Tower the morning she decided to reclaim her name. Cameras swarmed, workers whispered, and her board members paled when she walked in with her head held high. The case she presented left no room for escape. Within hours, the conspirators were removed, arrested, and stripped of the power they had abused. The media called it a historic comeback, praising Aurora's intelligence, resilience, and strength. But the world didn't see the quiet moments between the headlines. How she leaned against a wall backstage, breathing shakily after winning a battle she never should have faced alone.
how Ethan stood beside her, steady as always, without asking for anything, and how Lily wrapped her arms around Aurora when they met again, telling her, "Dad was really worried about you." Aurora's expression softened in a way Ethan hadn't seen before, a softness that wasn't weakness, but healing. Weeks passed, the city moved on, and Aurora regained full control of her company. Yet she found herself spending more evenings at Ethan's small apartment than her penthouse, sitting at his kitchen table, helping Lily with homework, or simply watching the quiet warmth of a life she had never believed she could have. One night, with the city lights glowing beneath her balcony, she stood beside Ethan, nervous in a way that felt unfamiliar. She turned toward him and asked, "If that night had gone differently, if I hadn't disappeared, do you think we could have had something real?" The question hung between them, fragile and hopeful. Ethan didn't hesitate. He took her hand gently and said, "We still can." Her breath hitched, a soft smile breaking across her face as though he'd handed her something she'd never dared to reach for. In that moment, Aurora realized she had spent years fighting battles, building walls, and proving she was unbreakable, only to find that the life she truly wanted was simple: a quiet home, a man who chose her without hesitation, and a little girl who had already made space for her heart. For the first time, the future didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a family.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to follow Drew Daily Stories for more emotional twists, dramatic turns, and unforgettable journeys. Your next favorite story is already waiting.